What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is the podcast for anyone that performs on stage with Ableton Live, playback engineers, musicians, worship leaders. If that's you, you are in the right place. First, before we dive in, I realize quite often I have people reach out and they say, I don't even know your name. So I'm going to try every time I create a piece of content just to remind you who I am. So it feels a little more like a conversation and not just me, lecturing for a few minutes. So my name's Will. I'm an Ableton Live certified trainer, the founder of From Studio to Stage, which is a company focused on helping you learn how to perform on stage with Ableton Live. So as I record this, actually today is the Live 12 launch day. Now, Live 12 has been announced. It is currently in public beta. I'll put a link in the description of the show notes so you can click through and join the public beta if you want to. It's completely free. I also released kind of my initial public review of that today. So I'll link that in the show notes if you haven't seen it yet. And then finally, I have my full Getting Started with Live 12 course that was released today, launch day. Put that in the description and the show notes as well too. But I wanted to do kind of honestly, I have no structure to this. I have no notes because I wanted to do a top of mind as it's fresh in my mind as I've been thinking through this, honestly, for about the past month since I saw the first initial Live 12 kind of info and got some information as a certified trainer. I've had some thoughts in my mind with Live 12, with Ableton, with just general software when it comes to playback and live performance. So again, completely unfiltered, no structure, stream of consciousness. I wanted to share a few of my thoughts. I want this to feel a bit like a conversation. So please feel free in the comments of this, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching somewhere where you can comment, please respond. Let me know your thoughts. There's some questions I have in my mind that I want to share, that I want to ask. So let's kind of talk through this. So I heard about Live 12, I think about a month or so ago. As a certified trainer, you typically kind of get early access. I got early access. I watched the webinar for Live 12. And kind of my initial thoughts at first were there was a lot of focus on new instruments. There's a lot of focus on kind of MIDI transformation tools, things that were more for music production, music creation. And I didn't see a whole lot for live performance. And I'll be honest, I was a little bummed. I remember sitting through, I had a bit of a similar experience with the with the Push 3 announcement, which is an amazing instrument. I still don't have one. I don't have plans to get one at the moment. But I thought, well, this isn't a huge thing for live performance. Now, therein lies a big problem. And in fact, some of you on YouTube maybe watching this now kind of helped me change and shape my view of that. I always talk about how important context is. And I did a video, if you've been around the site and been around my world for a while, you may have heard this story before, so I apologize. But I did a video not too long ago where I talked about the best audio interfaces for live performance. And I mentioned how for live performance, you don't need audio inputs. And I got a bunch of comments from people that were like, what do you mean you don't need live inputs? And one in particular from someone, she was very kind, but was just kind of inquisitive, like, what do you mean we don't need audio inputs? Where am I going to plug my mic and guitar in for live looping? And it kind of, in an instant, opened my mind and went, oh, live performance means different things to different people. Live performance for you may be a DJ, maybe a live looping setup. It may be playback on stage. It may be playback off stage. Maybe using an app like Prime or Playback in your church as opposed to Ableton Live. Live performance means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for me, when I saw the Push 3 announcement, further back, I went, man, this, I'm not incredibly excited about this because this isn't a huge thing for live performance. Now, if you're live looping, if you use Ableton and trigger scenes and do kind of a live looping thing, then I think Push 3 could be really cool. The standalone stuff is cool. I still would not rely just on that. But I went, okay, I can understand aspects for live performance that would be great. But I wish there was more for playback. I wish there was more for people that are on stage using Ableton in a playback environment. And then we fast forward to Live 12. So I had kind of that similar experience with this. And kind of my first thought was, man, has Ableton kind of abandoned those of us in the playback world? There's features that we, have kind of asked for and would like for a long time, the ability to copy locators between sets, to copy tempo and time signature changes between sets. Now, of course, I have my markers track. I have my tempo track that I've taught for probably over 15 years now, that other people have adopted and taught as well that solve those problems, but the time signature thing is a big one. The ability to kind of move tempo between set, export tempo between set, to import a set, from Digital Performer or Pro Tools to make kind of an easy transport, really, really simple. Some features like that would be really, really nice in the playback world. That, I mean, we've kind of needed these features since the launch of Ableton that we still have not gotten. So I think it's really easy when you see a announcement like Live 12 and you scroll through and you go, can locators transfer between projects? No, there's nothing there. I think it's easy to kind of get a little bummed out and go, have they forgotten about us? What features, why isn't this feature there? Why isn't that feature there? But honestly, the more I kind of dug into Live 12, I realized a general theme of Live 12 was just refinements and improvements. And so you'll see in my review, I obviously talked about just visually, everything looks different. It's a much more cohesive look. It kind of allows you to adopt the interface, adapt the interface to be what you want it to be a little more fluid. There's not these borders between it, between different sections. That's a really big improvement. Whether it's live performance in the studio, that's a big improvement. The momentary keyboard shortcuts to hold tab to get to session to make changes, let go and come back, that's huge for editing really quickly in a playback environment. The MIDI commands to join, to split, to I forgot what they call it. I've got my notes in front of me. Fit to time range, chop notes, join notes, fit to time range. Those are a big improvement as well. The browser updates, I'm like 75% of the way towards the browser. I still think I wish there were still some more folders to like separate sounds. I don't love that I have to rely on filters, but I'm getting there. But the visual updates I think are really, really cool. Like having the mixer and arrangement view is a nice update. Again, things could get crowded really easily, but they clearly spent some time on cleaning things up. Right now, I look at features like tuning, I look at the scale feature, and I immediately I think, well, those are not huge features for live performance. But then again, I'm reminded of I did a session. I've mentioned this multiple times now as I've talked about stuff. I did a session with a Gil who I believe I believe this was like a year and a half ago. Gil was a student. We did a one-on-one session, and he was showing me his setup. He had a virtual instrument that allowed him to load different alternative tunings in to play the type of music that he wanted to play. And so again, I look at the tunings feature of Live 12 and I go, well, it doesn't apply much to me. I'm a guitar player, so I can barely tune my guitar as is. But I know for a lot of performers around the world that are playing music that's not just, normal. I'd say normal, which is such an offensive thing. It's like when people say they drive on the wrong side of the road. It's like, well, there are some things that are relative. There's a lot of things that are absolute, but not necessarily normal, but a 12 tone scale or A440 tuning or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're playing, a particular type of music that uses a different tuning, this is a really important feature to you. And if you happen to be performing live doing it, that's obviously a great feature for live performance. So I have to keep that in mind. I have to remember that a feature like that could be big for live performance. And it's not necessarily big for playback, but that could be big for live performance. The other things that come to mind, and I still need to dive deep into this, is the performance pack that's included. Again, the feature that I think could be really helpful for playback in general is the performer, which allows you to create kind of a custom interface. I think that could be a useful tool when you don't have a MIDI controller available. You could create your own MIDI controller. The thing I was thinking about initially too that could be cool is if I have a MIDI controller, I'm often doing MIDI assignments. This would allow me to kind of create a MIDI controller where I could make custom MIDI assignments without that being connected, which could be cool. And then there's obviously a lot of live looping stuff. I honestly, I think if you are a live looping artist, Live 12 is probably the biggest update that you've gotten in a long time since the addition of Looper, whenever that was, which was quite a while ago. I think Looper's been around for a long time. I remember Live 9, maybe even before then, I think it was around. But this is really big. So the performance pack, the arrangement looper could potentially be beneficial for those of us doing playback. I still have to live with it a little bit more and figure out. Again, check out my review so you can see that. I think for live looping artists, though, the pre-arranger device is really, really cool. I need to live a little more with the snapshot device. I don't have that in front of me right now, so I can't remember the exact name of that, but that allows you to create snapshots. I struggled to get it to work when I was initially using it. I need to spend a little more time. But again, as a live looper, I do think the pre-arranger is going to be massive to allow you to do what a lot of folks use session view and IUC driver to accomplish. You can now do an arrangement view. And I think that's good because a lot of that type of looping is very linear. You've got a plan, you know where you're going to go, and you're using the unique features of session view to accomplish that. But if you're doing it linearly, you might as well do this because that's linear, right? Session view is not meant to be linear. It's meant to be non-linear, and it's meant to be go kind of whenever. And so if you're doing something linear and you're programming that, pre-programming that, might as well transfer it over to arrangement view. So I'm interested to see what a lot of live looping artists do. Again, I'm going to spend some time there. We don't focus on live looping on the channel. I'm gonna, I've kind of honed things in to say we are focused on primarily playback on stage, virtual keys, virtual instruments, that sort of stuff. But that's a big one. The new accessibility stuff is huge. The keyboard shortcuts, they're huge. I mentioned the momentary keyboard shortcuts. I'll do some specific videos talking more about that. Those are massive. I mentioned this in my course, the ability to use single key keyboard shortcuts while the computer MIDI keyboard is still enabled is a really cool update. The accessibility stuff is great because it allows greater control and navigation of Ableton from the keyboard. So I think there's some good small refinements and small updates to Ableton that continues to improve the experience, right? I'll be honest, there were some things with Live 11, I believe was the one, that we got some nice updates, but I didn't feel like we got anything. Honestly, I think Live 12 is a better update for those of us doing playback than Live 11 was, because I think some of the new keyboard shortcut stuff is big. Again, the performance pack stuff is big. The kind of being able to customize the view a little better is big. Mixer and arrangement view, momentary keyboard shortcuts, the MIDI editing stuff. So I think there's more for those of us that are performing on stage in Live 12 than I think was there in Live 11. Again, that means different things to different people. So you may be going, well, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah. I'm open to that. I'm fine for you to say that. But if I define live performance in my worldview, which is playback, which is people on stage with other musicians playing in a typical classical kind of band type scenario, not classical like music, but let's call it traditional band setting using Ableton for backing tracks. I do think there's some good updates here, some good refinements that are going to make even those things easier. Now to wrap up though, every time Ableton releases a new update, it does bring to mind, and I'll be honest, we're just talking as friends here. I've thought this more in the past couple releases than I ever have before, which is, will there be a day where I step away from Ableton as my software for playback? I think a few years ago, 5 years ago, whenever it was, would have been longer ago than that now, because I'm trying to think timeline. So 10 years ago, I guess now, that Loop Community released Prime and then Multitracks released Playback. In the church world, those two apps have been absolute game changers for playback. They both started with the goal of simplifying the process of using tracks. And I still think for most churches, most people that are getting started with using tracks, you absolutely should use Prime and Playback. Those approaches break really, really quickly. If you're going to use playback, you have to use multi-tracks content. If you're going to use Prime, you have to use Loop Community content. As soon as you start using the cloud features of both of those apps, you're spending more time getting that content loaded in than I do in formatting my Ableton songs, right? I can format a multi-tracks Ableton song or even Loop Community Ableton song in Ableton in 2 to 3 minutes. And the time it takes for you to upload, process, and format for those apps, it just doesn't make sense. So there's a very clear breaking point for those apps. Those apps make zero sense outside of a house of worship environment. So if you're watching this as a cover band, tribute band, a band traveling on the road, and you're thinking about loading your album into Playback or Prime, maybe it's good as a backup, but just the amount of time you'll devote into that just doesn't make sense, right? So those apps don't make sense there. Obviously, there's still Digital Performer, which I think has way more focus on live performance. And as part of their marketing, I think has a big emphasis on live performance from a playback perspective, I think, than Ableton does. I think they've kind of welcomed that crowd with open arms a little more than Ableton has. I think Ableton's live performance focus is heavily focused on DJs, heavily focused on live looping artists, more so than folks using Ableton for playback. Though I will say, I think 3 to 4 times recently, I've seen Ableton's Instagram reshare photos of people using Ableton in a playback environment, which is pretty cool. I never had seen that before up until this year. So I think there's some doors opening there to a little more kind of like inclusive live performance community as opposed to just these kind of specific silos. But I do often think, will there be a world where I consider another software other than Ableton? Presonus Studio One has made some really cool improvements there. I remember years and years ago, some friends at Presonus showing me features that were coming that I believe are now out with their, I think it's called the show page. Different things there that I think are cool. Again, Digital Performer obviously has been used for a lot of people for a long time. There's folks that still use Pro Tools for playback in a live scenario. They're braver than I am. I would never do that. But I just in the back of my mind is this constant thought of, is there space for a new program that is not a DAW, that does not record, that does not handle virtual instruments, that the sole focus is just playing back tracks? Like, honestly, I think if we went back to early playback app or Prime app, but we put them on a desktop computer and it wasn't just focused for house of worship, I think there's a very clear, and maybe I'm off on this, but I think there's a very clear space for an app like that, that its sole focus is rock solid playback, the features you need to edit, to build sets quickly, to have freedom and flexibility when using tracks and playback. And again, it doesn't record, it doesn't do drone pads, it doesn't do all the silly things that playback in particular does now. It's just become this very complicated, bloated app in my mind. And I think Prime is a little better better representation of the original goal that both of those apps set out to do. They obviously are competing with each other. They obviously have to add features to stay kind of lockstep with each other. But I think if both of those apps had committed to a simpler future and just said, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, I think that both of those apps would be in a better place personally. But I just wonder, is there space for another app in the playback ecosystem and the digital audio ecosystem? Again, it doesn't record, it doesn't do everything. It's not available on iOS. It is desktop, it's Mac only. It's very dedicated and has a very clear picture of who we are, what we do, what we don't do. That's kind of what's always in the back of my mind. But I think to wrap up, I think Live 12 is a great update. It doesn't have big flashy playback features. Again, if you're a live looping artist, you're going to love the performance pack stuff. And I'm going to spend some more time trying to dive into those. But what it does have is some incredible refinements that are going to make a difference no matter how or where you're using Ableton. So I highly suggest you check it out. And if you're on the fence and you're going, well, I'm going to wait to purchase Ableton till Live 12 comes out, this is actually the perfect time to purchase Ableton. Because if you click the link in the show notes, you can get 20% off your purchase of Live 11 now. And then when Live 12 comes out in early 2024, you get a free upgrade. So you don't need to wait. You can purchase Live 11 now, save 20% if you use the link in the description of this video and in the show notes of this episode. And then you'll get a free upgrade in early 2024 when Live comes out. Also, again, like I mentioned, if you want to see my review, if you want to see my brand new course that's available, launched the day that Live 12 went into public beta, or if you want to join the public beta, I've included links to figure and find all that stuff out in the description of this video. Finally, comment, let me know what you like about this update, what you wish it had. Again, be kind. Every time a company releases software or hardware, I get really just pissed off and have no patience for people that are just a-holes about it, that, you know, say these people are idiots because they didn't include whatever. And I'm like, honey, listen, you've never stepped behind a computer and tried to develop a program and felt the pressure of that and the pressure of creating for specific personas and being very clear in what you want to do. So just be kind. Even if your response is like, man, I wish they had whatever, let's just think about how we're saying it. Imagine if someone showed up to your job and you know, I don't know what you do, provide the report for the person, you release the song for the person, whatever your job was, you as a band just finished a song and instantly someone walked right up to you and went, no key change? It's like, what the heck, man? Like, just chill out, go hug somebody. Let's leave some kind comments, but let me know what features you're most excited about Live 12, what you wish Ableton had. And then, yeah, let's continue the discussion. Let's continue the discussion about maybe there's an app that could be out there that's just focused to playback, that's not recording, not MIDI. It's just playback. So that's what I got for you today on Behind the Spacebar. If you like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe if you're over on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then consider following or subscribing to the show. It's free. Leave a rating or review if you like this episode. And most of all, most importantly, if you can think of someone that you think would enjoy this conversation and joining in this conversation, please share this episode with them. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.